Hello and welcome to Criminal Justice Inspection Unpacked, the podcast of Criminal Justice Inspection Northern Ireland, where we explore issues and developments in the criminal justice system. I'm Melanie McVeigh, and in today's episode we're focusing on youth justice and youth interventions in particular. That's the work that's being done here in Northern Ireland by the Youth Justice Agency's Youth Services Directorate to engage with children in the community who have been involved in offending behaviour. Joining me is Roisin Devlin from CJI, the lead inspector on the recently published Inspection of Youth Interventions, which looked in detail at the Youth Justice Agency's work in this area. We also have Stephen Martin, Chief Executive of the Youth Justice Agency, and the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People, Chris Quinn. It's great to have you all with us, so let's get the conversation started. And I'm going to come to you, Roisin. Can you tell us why was it important to carry out this inspection and what was it you were looking at?
Well, we wanted to understand how children are supported by the Youth Justice Agency and also how staff are empowered to deliver high quality interventions. And that was a key focus of the inspection.
And as part of that, who was it important for you to engage with and who were you talking to get views and get an understanding of what was going on in this space?
Well, we spoke with children and parents and carers, and that was during the scoping phase for the inspection as well as the actual fieldwork. We also spoke with a number of experts by experience who were engaging with the Youth Justice Agency and were able to reflect on how they had found the support they had received. We spoke with staff and visited the different Youth Justice Agency area offices. And there were also stakeholder organisations that we had engaged with in voluntary sector and academics, as well as the Youth Justice Agency's partners in criminal justice system. So we spoke with the Police Service at Northern Ireland and the Public Prosecution Service, the Department of Justice, and we also spoke with other statutory partners, so that would be those in the health and social care sector and in education.
And am I right that this was the first time a criminal justice inspection had been looking specifically into this area? Previous work would have been around the Juvenile Justice Centre?
That's right. In the past criminal justice inspection, we would look at custodial services that Youth Justice Agency provide, and we do that routinely. We've also looked at different aspects of what Youth Justice Agency do in the community as part of thematic inspections. So we've looked at the response to child sexual exploitation and engaged with Youth Justice Agency in that. But this is the first time we looked exclusively at how Youth Justice Services supports children in the community.
And what did you find during this inspection? Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, well, we found really hugely motivated and dedicated staff. They were really driven by the relationships that they had built with children and families, and that was really important. And the children and families that we spoke to reflected that as well. Also victims and their supporters were really positive about the support they had provided. We looked at different casework that the Youth Justice Services undertake, and we found a lot of good work in that respect. And some of the things we were picking up on were really about how well the record was reflecting what the staff were doing. So some of the improvements we called for were around reflecting how far the child had been engaged in agreeing their intervention plan or in agreeing the assessment.
I'm going to come to you, Stephen, because you're heading up the organisation at the moment. Inspection's not something that any organisation relishes, but perhaps what can you tell us what this inspection has told you about the delivery of the youth intervention work your organisation's taking forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, for me, it's confirmed something that I've known for the 3 years I've been in the organisation is the dedication, professionalism and skill of our staff. I mean, the commitment is absolutely exemplary. I think it also picks up very positively the impact of some of the partnerships that we've had and the impact of of that work together on the lives of vulnerable children, their families, and witnesses and communities. And I think it's reconfirmed for me that we're an innovative organisation. While we don't always get it right, that we've got a commitment to innovation and continuous improvement. So on the positive side, I think that those are the things that have very clearly come out of the report for me.
But there are also some challenges that I think the inspection has been picking up. What do you consider those challenges to be for yourselves?
Yeah, I think Roisin has already kind of commented on some of them. I think we're very good at doing the work. We're not always very good at evidencing or recording what we do. So I think there's certainly a piece around how we do that a bit better. There's something around, I think Roisin and her colleagues have picked up positive impact of our earlier stage diversion work, which is where we try and at the earliest point of a child entering the criminal justice system, try and divert them away. But there's some work there we need to do to sharpen up our governance around that. And I think kind of finally then there's some of the areas where we have developed, such as our assessment tool, we just need to kind of sharpen up. So a lot of it for me is about sharpening up. We've done a lot of innovation, but it's about how we kind of taking that step back and sharpening that up a little bit more.
So inspection can be used by yourselves as a tool for further internal improvement?
Absolutely. And certainly the self-assessment part of this inspection at the start was really good for us to take a step back, to pause, reflect. And some of the things that we find during that, the gaps, we were already starting to implement during the inspection. So it was very, very helpful.
I'm going to bring you in at this point, Chris, if that's all right. From your perspective, you're the Commissioner for Children and Young People. What do you see are the benefits of inspecting this area of work?
I see it as hugely beneficial, particularly given that the inspection was framed within the UNCRC and children.
And that's the United Nations
Convention on the Rights of the Child. So that's a key piece of legislation for my office and I. But in terms of the value of this work and the importance of it is very significant, and I would hope that the departments and ministers take note. And I was really encouraged actually when I read the time frame put on the various recommendations, because that gives us something to work towards collectively.
Mm-hmm. Do you think early interventions and diversion can make a difference for a young person?
Absolutely. I've seen through my own career how early intervention can be life-changing. I just came from Woodlands today and met with young people involved in the forum there, and they spoke openly and honestly about the challenges that they had faced in their lives. And one of the questions that I put to them was about the support that they needed in their lives to, I suppose, ensure that they can learn and modify behaviour and don't end up in the system. So early intervention is something that I am prioritising as Commissioner, and we often talk about early intervention, right back to infanthood and engaging with parents and babies. So absolutely crucial, I think, in multiple areas of work that we're looking at currently.
I was just going to say as well that Roisin was talking about the involvement of children and families as part of this piece of work. Why do you think it's important to have those voices as part of an inspection piece?
Well, there are a number of reasons. One, I'll go back to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and Article 12 of it speaks to the importance of young people's voices in decisions that affect them. There's also a responsibility within the legislation that set my office up, which speaks to the important role that parents have and listen to their voice. But I think probably most importantly is the lived experiences. So it's all very well people like myself reading about issues and trying to understand them, but young people who have lived experiences of the system and the challenges they face are crucially important, and that goes for their parents and their carers as well. So I really commend the work that was done in terms of involving children, young people, carers, parents at every possible step of the way.
I'll maybe at this point move on to looking at the actual inspection recommendations and going back to you, Roisin, around that. Perhaps you could talk us through some of those key pieces and give us a sense of why you've you've made those and what you would hope to see happening.
Well, we made 5 strategic recommendations and 5 operational recommendations. So I maybe focus on some of the strategic recommendations first. And I have to say what we did find was excellent partnership arrangements that Youth Justice Agency staff had developed. And that was at a local level, including with police service, youth diversion officers, but also other police officers. One thing then that we did see when we looked at areas for improvement was the potential to bring that together strategically. So we think there was opportunities for Youth Justice Agency and Police Service and also Department of Justice to engage more at a strategic level and really bring about a strong vision for youth justice and drive that forward. We also found that there were really good partnerships with local service providers, but perhaps more that Youth Justice Agency could do to understand that regionally and perhaps expand it and develop it further. And then we found probably one of the greatest challenges for Youth Justice Agency was retention of its really skilled and child-centred workforce. And some of the challenges around that were pay grade structures and what opportunities there might be to work with the Department of Justice on that. So we have a recommendation that asks Youth Justice Agency and Department of Justice to look at how to further.
I see both gentlemen here are actually shaking their heads and nodding in agreement here. So does that resonate with yourselves from your perspective? Maybe I'll come to you first, Steve.
Absolutely. It's the number one risk facing the agency. We have brilliant staff, highly experienced, highly skilled, but they have the pay differential between what my staff are paid and staff in trust and probation is significant. So we have been losing a lot of very, very experienced staff and been struggling to replace them. And when we have replaced them, we've replaced them with graduates who are fantastic. But it's a big leap to come straight out of university, having done a social work or youth work degree, to come into practice. So we are starting to feel that, and we're really grateful to CJI for pointing that out, because it's an issue that we can't deal with on our own, because pay is a Northern Ireland civil service wide issue. So we've a lot of people to convince that this is an issue that needs to be addressed, but I'm really determined that we do that. So I'm grateful for this being highlighted in the report.
What about you, Chris? Do those strategic recommendations Roisin was referring to, do they sound relevant from your perspective?
Absolutely. And again, just reflecting on my own experiences over the last few weeks. Last week I was in Derry and visited the office there and met some absolutely phenomenal staff, and their commitment shone through. And a lot of those staff have been there for many, many years, and that shows the commitment despite the pay differential, despite the challenges that they face. That's to be commended. But in terms of when I'm thinking about challenges in terms of successful youth intervention, I'm thinking about some of the ingredients being relationships with the young person, with their family, with the community, time, with that goes resources, understanding that young people will relapse and that this is a long process. This can take years, and that consistent adult in a young person's life is absolutely crucial. And again, linked to that, I think, is removing the stigma. So the stigma involved in being involved with the juvenile justice system, but that comes with those relationships. I was walking through Derry last week with one of the members of staff there, and the people on the street knew his name, and so that to me was a really good reflection about what real partnership looks like. And in terms of what early intervention looks like, it really that relationship is crucial, and retaining those highly skilled and motivated staff is a really important part of the recipe.
Sounds like it's both yourself and Stephen are on the same page on that one. Looking back now, Roisin, there were a number of operational recommendations within the report as well. Can you give us a sense of what they were?
They were really about enhancing the quality of services that Youth Justice Agency already delivers. But as part of the inspection, we looked at a number of the interventions that were being provided We're looking at really desistance needs and how well they're identified.
And when you're talking about desistance, that's exactly
the process of moving away from the behaviours that have brought the children to the Youth Justice Agency, and that can be a process that fluctuates, but it's about identifying those and the interventions and programmes. Also, if there are any safety factors that are impacting the child, and drawing those out. And then also any risk of harm to the victim, to the public, and ensuring that that's all addressed within the intervention and the plan. And not all of that may be for Youth Justice Agency. The partner agencies and a multidisciplinary approach is really important. So I suppose we're asking the Youth Justice Agency develop a routine quality assurance process that looks similarly at that type of assessment. So that was two of the operational recommendations that we made.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, these recommendations, your organisation, you've accepted them. What's the next step for yourselves? What's the challenge around implementation?
I mean, I suppose in terms of next steps, we are working on our action plan at the minute. We've spoken to a number of partners, done a lot of work within the organisation, and we'll take that action plan to our board within the next 4 to 6 weeks. I suppose the biggest challenges are really around, for us going forward, around that retention piece, and also budget. So 10 years ago, our budget was around £20 million. Our current budget is around £15 million. If you take account of inflation, that's about a 50% cut. So I don't know too many organisations that could continue to deliver high quality services with a 50% cut. So I think those two, retention of high skilled staff and budget, are going to be the biggest challenges over the next number of years.
I suppose it's vital as well to learning how to use what you have in the best possible way to get the best outcome for yourselves too.
Well, I think this report has shown that we are doing that, but there's only so much that you can cut without impacting services. I think we're at the point now where we can't cut anymore without really having a detrimental impact on the quality of our service.
Does that resonate with yourself, Chris?
Yeah, we're in a very challenging financial situation. There's no doubt. Those figures that we've just heard are alarming, to say the least, and I guess there's a bit of work to be done around, I suppose, looking at how we invest the finances that we do have. And all of the evidence points to the same place. All of the evidence points to early intervention. I'm really interested in the quality assurance piece as well, actually, and I think most practitioners would welcome that, because that's another way of demonstrating impact, I guess, if you get that right. But we need to invest more money in the early piece, and ensure that young people have the support that they require at the time of crisis and even at pre-crisis stage. And I'm just thinking of experiences that young people have shared with me. Often what you find is that when young people are in crisis, the support simply isn't there, and that can lead to a series of events or decisions that have a longer term impact, or all of a sudden young people are caught in a cycle.
I suppose that's where, bringing it back to yourself, Stephen, about effective partnerships with your other organisations, your statutory partners from the police service, public prosecution, probation, courts and tribunals. That's very important. But also, what about the engagement with your voluntary and community sector colleagues? How important and valuable do you find that is?
It's very valuable, and particularly with, Chris isn't technically in the voluntary sector, but I mean, Chris and his office plays a key role, and we're really, I suppose, we're delighted to have Chris as our Children's Commissioner, and he has already engaged very fulsomely with our services and with our young people, which is fantastic. I suppose with the voluntary community sector more widely, there's always a little bit of tension, because as the CJI report highlights, we don't have the budget to fund long-term services. So our partnership is more around strategy, planning, and seeing how we perhaps bring services together. So we're doing sort of smaller things. So, for example, recently NICCY, we're doing a research piece on adults from a minority ethnic background. So we were able to partner with them and add a little bit of money to that work, and then they were able to extend it to children. So it's those kinds of smaller partnerships that we're able to do, but we certainly appreciate and value our colleagues in the voluntary community sector. Unfortunately, we don't have the financial metal to support them in a more fulsome way, but we can do it in other ways.
And again, just going back to that workforce retention piece, because it's obviously very important for you as the chief executive of the organisation, and Chris is also reiterating that as Roisin's drawn out. Is there what steps can you take to address that?
So we've done some things already. I was with a group of staff this morning talking about health and wellbeing and communication. We've done a lot around learning and development. There's a lot of the softer stuff that was within our gift that we can do to make YGA a more attractive place to be. But fundamentally, when there's a £10,000 difference between your pay and a colleague in another organisation, it's very difficult to retain staff. So we are making a business case for a retention recruitment allowance for those staff, but there are a significant number of steps to go through. Pay is a Northern Ireland civil service wide matter. So I'm not predicting that we will have any great success, but we are going to try our best to make that case convincingly, because without it, we are going to continue to lose staff.
And lose that experience and lose those links and engagement, which Chris has already
It's like those relationships. I mean, I know exactly the member of staff that Chris is referring to. That member of staff has worked with 2 and 3 generations of the same family in Derry. He knows exactly what's going on in a family circumstance. He's trusted where a young person will not open up to anybody else. He's trusted to have that relationship, and that relationship is fundamental to persistence, to helping a child turn their life around. So that's what we would lose if we can't resolve this.
How do you quantify value of that nature for people? In terms of what positives, Stephen, have you taken from the inspection? And I'll be coming to you with something similar in a minute, Chris. But
yeah, I mean, I think I talked to Melanie earlier about really how the inspections found the professionalism, dedication and focus of our staff, and the impact that's made is the number one. I think the number two would be that value of the partnership. We work in a child first way in YGA, which is very strongly linked to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. But importantly, all of our partners in the justice system work in that way with us. And I think that shared ethos has been fundamental in helping to achieve system change. The number of young people, as Roisin and her colleagues find, who are going to court now for offending behaviour has significantly reduced over the last number of years because of the earlier stage diversion work we're doing. And that ethos of child first, which focuses on the child's needs rather than treating them as an offender, has been absolutely fundamental.
A game changer in terms
absolutely game changer. Absolutely.
I'll just come over to you, Chris. What about yourself? What have you found that's maybe encouraging about this inspection, and what it's found, and what do you think is challenging as well?
The child first model, I would have to agree, there is something that stood out for us. And in terms of the linkage between adverse childhood experiences, CAMS, the integrated approach, recognising the need and the strength of partnership working. But I think I just wanted, before I lose it, I want to go back to the challenging circumstances that we're in. And I would like to highlight that we've got a Children's Services Cooperation Act, which I think is being underutilised but could provide some solutions, or at least act as a catalyst for some solutions as to how we can pull together. And I would like in the future to see that as a vehicle for pooling resources. And in terms of the community voluntary sector, I think I would agree that the links there are absolutely crucial. And you can see what happens, and again in Derry we saw that there are really strong links with the community and with youth work sector. And I think there's a bit of a conversation to be had on a cross-departmental level about how we best meet the needs of young people generally, in how we're planning and how we're delivering services. Is there a role that the youth service could play here? What's their strategy for engaging with the hardest to reach? What's their strategy for funding the voluntary sector?
Wider conversation, Chris, that wider view.
Yeah, and we would hope. I mean, we're waiting for a programme for government to be published, and in that programme for government, we would hope, my office and I, and I'm sure others, would hope that children and young people are front and centre in there. And I know that's I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but the point I'm making is that if we put children and young people first, children first model again, in our budget and in our planning, and particularly those most vulnerable, we need to wrap services around vulnerable children and young people from the earliest stages in their lives. And the report does speak to that very loudly.
Indeed. And those, you must have been seeing those important recommendations. Why is it important that they're taken forward? You had alluded to the timeframes. You welcomed the timeframes around them earlier on.
I was really encouraged by that. I think sometimes my pessimistic hat on me, sometimes we're stuck in a cycle of review and deep dives, an end-to-end review about this and another review about that. But it's really important that reviews aren't published and put on a shelf somewhere. It's really important that they're followed through on, and it's great to hear that action has already happened, actually. But I was encouraged by the timeframes. There was, very specific timeframes on each of the actions, which I believe is really important. What's the hope here? The hope is to get the best deal for children and young people and their families. So in order to do so, we need to keep the momentum going.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, do you find the timeframes around recommendations to be helpful, or maybe a bit of a challenge at times?
Oh, and some of them will be a challenge, particularly the ones where we're working in partnership. But I think that the value for us of the CJI inspections with the self-assessment at the start is you don't start working on the actions at the end of, once you get the report. You're starting to work on the actions once you've done that self-assessment and identified some issues. So we've been working on a number of things throughout the last 18 months. But yes, some of the timeframes will be challenging. But as Chris said, it's important to have an end stop date and something to work towards. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So a bit of a challenge in there for everybody, but maybe not a bad thing to have. They're not coming after you, Roisin. It's a good thing. I'll come back to you if you don't mind, Chris, before we move on. It is about just the integrated approach for children. You've spoke a lot about that. From your perspective, what is the difference that can make for those youngsters, for those young people and their families?
Yeah, I used the word life-changing earlier, and I think that's the long and the short of it. These experiences can be absolutely fundamentally life-changing for children and families. Again, I'm reflecting on things that have happened very recently, but in Derry, I had a conversation with police, youth diversion officer, CAMS, other youth justice staff, but the key thing was they were all there, under one roof. They're managing cases. They found a way to share data and to share valuable information about very vulnerable people in order to help them. So on that to me, that's the model. You want the child in the middle and you want the services wrapped around them. So that integrated approach is absolutely a crucial dynamic.
Roisin, what, from your perspective, do inspectors want to see happening in the coming months and years in this area?
Well, like as Stephen said, Youth Justice Agency is working on an action plan to address the recommendations, which is really positive, and some actions had already commenced during the inspection. I think recommendations that involve a number of organisations are challenging, because organisations do have their own ways of working and their own priorities quite often. That's it. But when you put the child at the centre and follow the child's journey, it is about enhancing the outcome for them. So we would really like to see some things, perhaps just with a bit more ambition around. There's children and young people who come through to the Youth Justice Agency repeatedly, and perhaps something different could be done there. Children with lived experience of care, we could see through the inspection the complexities and challenges there. And of course, Youth Justice Agency are really bringing forward that trauma-informed approach in their journey and their work. So that strategic recommendation for Department of Justice, Youth Justice Agency in place to really get together and develop that vision and work on it. We'd really like to see that.
That would be a success out of this inspection for you. What about yourself, Chris? Is there anything particular you would hope to see happening from now with the inspection recommendations in this piece of work?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots, but one of the things that I want to pick up on is the trauma-informed approach. That is absolutely crucial. No, I don't say lots of things are crucial, but we have to understand that many issues that people face in life can be linked to trauma. And without speaking for other people, I know there's a real keen interest within the judiciary as well to understand the trauma-informed approach. And we've made huge advances in terms of neuroscience, and we know more about brain development, and we know more about transitions, and we know more now about emotional scars, and how can we support people, and from this perspective, young people who have experienced trauma. So I think the trauma-informed practice is something we ought to speak more about. And train, I think it's not that I'm an expert in this at all, but I think it's really important that training and development for people working on the coalface is available in terms of the trauma-informed practice.
And Stephen, coming to you, what are your hopes for the future of the Youth Justice Agency's work in this area and youth interventions?
I suppose picking up on Roisin and Chris's point, I think on a really positive note, we're a very values-driven organisation, as are our partners. So the child first ethos drives what we do, but also trauma-informed practice. We've made a commitment to become a more trauma-informed organisation. We've introduced, partly as a result of this inspection, trauma-informed supervision training for all of our first-line supervisors. And we're trying to work in a trauma-informed way with our young people, our families, victims. So I think we're starting from a really good place. And where I see us going is taking that values-driven approach, just building on it on the years ahead, involving children and young people much more fully through our participation, and providing that we can retain our staff and have a decent budget settlement. I think the future looks fairly rosy.
Well, on that positive note, that brings to a close another engaging discussion and this episode of Criminal Justice Inspection Unpacked. Thank you to all my guests for joining me and shining a spotlight on youth interventions and the work that is currently being done to divert children and young people away from the criminal justice system. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation and you'll listen again, as our next podcast episode will be exploring the issues and challenges around effective court administration, a key area of our criminal justice system in Northern Ireland.